All right, we're getting started here. All right, big crowd today. Jeez Louise. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Benjamin Johnson. I'm the events coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers here in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional homeland of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As we listen to our speakers share their words today, may we remember the Indigenous stories that have been shared on this land for time immemorial. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Son of Nobody by Yann Martel, published by Knopf Canada. Thank you so much to Yann for being here this evening, as well as Alice, surprise guest, and for working with us to make this event happen. I guess I shouldn't have been that surprised, but just a note, this event is being live streamed, especially for those on the floor. So there is a webcam just behind you over there. Please try not to knock it, or that'll be a weird experience for the people at home. I'd also like to take this time to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. If you would like to buy copies of Son of Nobody, Life of Pi, or numerous other titles that Yann has published and that we have floating around the store, we have them on the signing table behind me, as well as on the desk by where you first walked in. It is obscured right now by human bodies, but they are there, I promise. You're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. Just please also remember to buy it on the way out, or someone's going to get a book that says like to Kelsey or something, and that'll be weird. But without further ado, probably unnecessarily for many of you, allow me to introduce our author. Yann Martel is the author of Life of Pi, the global bestseller that won the 2002 Man Booker Prize and was adapted to the screen in the Oscar-winning film by Ang Lee. He's the author of 3 other novels, Self, Beatrice and Virgil, and The High Mountains of Portugal, and a short story collection, The Facts Behind the Helsinki Roccamatios. I practiced that word beforehand. He lives in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Everyone please give him a warm, and Alice, a warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome here tonight. Thank you so much for being here with me and with Yann to celebrate his new book. We'll do a short Q&A, and I have a few questions for Yann to get us started. But I want to just say before we begin that firstly, if you would like to come in from back there and sit, there's several people sitting on the ground. It's not perfect, but we'll make this cozy and fun. And really what this means too is that it's really important for both of us to say thank you for taking time on a Monday evening to support writing, to support Yann. Coming to a book event is a big deal. It's really difficult in a very busy, noisy world to take time for storytelling. And here on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis, we live in a place full of story. And to be here tonight with all of you, celebrating one of our writers, knowing that the room is chock-a-block with other storytellers. If you turn and reach over or look behind, you'll see another storyteller here in the room, celebrating the written word, stories here together, is because you all took time to come out to be here with Yann. So thank you so much, and thank you to Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, to Jasper and to McNally Robinson for squeezing everybody in. So not you, Jasper, that's one of our children, different Jasper. So I wanted to start with a question for Yann about this new book, Son of Nobody. Could you talk to us for a little bit about the genesis of this and where the inspiration came from?
Thank you, Alice. It's a slightly self-interested question. I wrote this book inspired by the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, which I'd never read until very late in life, until it was recommended to me by Alice, who is a much better, greater reader than I am. And she'd been going through various Iliad translations, dissatisfied by most of them, until she came upon this wonderful translation, read it, and suggested to me, why don't you read it? And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll read this. What will no doubt be a venerable, boring classic. And in a wonderful translation, it's all a question of translations. This is a particularly good translation by an American poet named Stephen Mitchell. I'd already read a translation of his of Gilgamesh and the letters to Rilke, and I remember liking it a lot. So I read it, and so it's thanks to Alice that the book was born, because I read the Stephen Mitchell translation, and far from being dull, it's a very peculiar book. It is literally the West's first book, right? The Greeks reinvented writing. they invited writing twice. And the second time round, in around the 8th century BC, the first book they wrote down, the very first thing they wrote down was Homer's Iliad. So it is literally the very first book in the West. Hey, Jen. Sorry, so many lovely people have come here. Thank you, by the way. So I was inspired by that, and I suddenly all these ideas started popping in my head because there are so many similarities or so many echoes. Most wars kind of resemble themselves. There's a few peculiarities. Thanks, Ella. Hi. You're not bothering anyone. Don't worry. There are certain resonances of the Trojan War that still echo today. First of all, it was a siege. A lot of waiting around. We're used to a lot of waiting around. You have to wait for this event to start. You don't have to wait at red lights. We're always waiting around. And this action, this epic, while being incredibly violent, the kind of gory violence that in some ways we love, in between these acts of atrocious violence, there's a thoughtfulness. There's a lot of asking of questions. You can see the origins of Greek philosophy in the Iliad. They ask questions about meaning. Why are we here? Why don't we just go home? And these sort of questions still resonate today. So the result of that reading and my reaction to it was several years later, Son of Nobody.
And I think that certainly what you've talked about with me, yeah, I think we should stand a little further apart. We haven't seen each other much, so so we're just going to get a little closer. The Iliad starts with one word, and I think it's essential to this book. Can you talk about that with us?
Yeah, that's another thing that surprised me. Here's the first book that the Greeks write, and you'd think, being the way they first present themselves, that they try to give them a positive image of themselves. You'd think it may be a book that would be soaked in nationalism, saying why they're better than everyone else. Well, not at all. The very first word of the Iliad is minim, which means wrath, rage. And it is a book about failed anger management. It is a book of insane rage between men and women, women and men. It is about failed anger management and the consequences of that. I mean, the Iliad, I'm sure you all know, is not the entirety of the Trojan War. It's only 52 days of it, and it recounts a quarrel between Agamemnon, the supreme commander of the Greek forces, and Achilles, their greatest warrior. And the results are catastrophic. Achilles, in a fit of pique, withdraws from fighting, and the Greeks start losing. The Trojan forces come right up to their ships. And so the results are catastrophic. And it struck me, this is how you present yourself to the West, as a bunch of dysfunctional, and it's also a profoundly tragic work. There is no redemption in that ancient Greek model. You die, and when you die, the best you can best you can hope for is a kind of immortality that people will still remember you. But even then, you end up in the Elysian Fields, if you're really at the top of the pyramid. And the Elysian Fields was no great place to be. The conceptions we have of paradise are from much later in history. The Elysian Fields were a very gray place where these souls sort of wander about, mourning the fact that they've lost their lives, wondering if they're still talked about in above ground. So it's a deeply tragic vision of life. And I think this is the summation of where you're at. Around 800 BC is this deep, deep, dark place. So that also struck me, and it also struck me, and I'll try to go through this really quickly, is there's actually no historical evidence for the Trojan War. Yes, there was a Troy, we know where it is, and there's 9 layers of it. And there's very elliptical evidence of tensions between this very wealthy city. It's in a magnificent spot on the western Anatolian coast. There's evidence of tension between Troy and the Hittite Empire to the east, and some evidence of tensions with they weren't called Greeks at the time, the Mycenaeans. There's some sort of evidence of tensions, the way we have with the United States right now, just tensions, but no concrete war. There's no evidence whatsoever for an actual 10-year war featuring these characters. There's no historical evidence whatsoever for Agamemnon, Achilles, any of these at all. So here he is, this quasi-fictional event that yielded this story that is still spoken about today. And yet there's no facts for it. And that's sort of, isn't that funny? Because there's another seminal event that happened a few hundreds of kilometers to the east, a few hundred of years later, featuring Jesus of Nazareth, for whom there's also no historical evidence. There's no birth certificate, there's no death certificate, and he does die. We do think he exists, obviously. There's no reason to doubt his existence, but the proof that there's no facts to it is look at Easter. We all know Jesus died on Easter, but hey, Easter varies. What other historical figure's date of death varies from year to year? You know, people die on June 1st. They die on June 1st every single year. It doesn't vary. So there's a lack, Jesus does not live in history the way, let's say, Napoleon Bonaparte does. There's a lack of historicity to him. And yet, once again, we have no facts. yet it's yield tremendous stories. And those two stories of Troy and of Jesus of Nazareth, and I say this whether you believe or not, that's not the point. Those two stories are completely foundational to who we are. So there's a line at the end of the book where I talk about feet of dreams, that we walk on feet of dreams. We're very good at rationalizing and thinking, and yet we walk on feet of dreams. And these are the 2 feet of Troy and the Jesus event. Those are the 2 feet of the West, and they're both the flimsiest of material evidence. And that really struck me.
So if I was sitting here right now, I might be a little nervous about starting the book because it feels very theoretical. But I think what you've actually managed to do is bring the history, the storytelling, the theoretical into the life of one man, Harlow Dunn. And I think something you just said then about that seeking immortality in that perhaps failed little life. Would that be something you think about when you think about him as a character? Can you talk about him a bit so people know what the book actually has too?
Yeah, it's not the layout was quite peculiar. Those who looked at the book, you'll see the page is divided in 2, exactly in the middle. The black line divides the page exactly in the middle, and above on the top half you will have fragments of this lost Trojan War epic called, that the scholar Harlow Dunn calls the Soad, and in the bottom you have footnotes. I was very happy to have that device. It's a novel in verse and footnotes, and the verse represent antiquity, and it looks kind of old, and it imitates the Homeric scansion. And at the bottom you have this modern technical thing called the footnote. Now, they're unusual footnotes. They're sort of they're academic. They tell you a bit about Homer's Iliad. You don't have to have read the Iliad. I myself didn't, so why would I presume that you have? Way smarter than me, but anyway, I don't want to presume that you've actually read the Iliad. So I explain where needed things about the Iliad. Then there's things about this found, invented epic, the Soad, about that. And then there's things about Harlow Dunn's life himself, because his life is falling apart. I wanted to create a parallel. There's no point in looking at history without creating, insights into the modern time. You look at the past in a sense to learn about the present. So there's a parallel. In the footnotes, you have Harlow Dunn's life that's disintegrated and also plagued by anger. I said anger is a very interesting emotion because it's there is something called righteous anger. Sometimes things are galling. Presently what's happening in the world it should be the result of a lot of anger. But the question is, what do you do with that anger? So you don't want to eliminate anger. You don't want to repress it, but you want it to be a useful emotion. So I said anger management. I said that in jest, but anger management truly is important. You don't want to have anger go away because there are things that legitimately should make us angry. But then what do you do with that? How do you transition from that to something more positive? So I wanted to have a reflection, an echo of this epic war and something more current. And it's no point comparing one war with another. It would be for military historians. I am not. I wanted to write the Trojan War into something small, into the kind of friction that some of us at least know ourselves or can intuit, a relationship falling apart. Because in a sense, both end up in hell. So as of Medea, the son of nobody of the title, that's his nickname. So as of Medea ends up in hell. And in a sense, so does Harlow. And whether you're in hell because of an actual war or a relationship falling apart, you're in hell. And that's what I wanted to look at, is this downward journey and what we might do about that.
I have so many more questions, but I think it's really important to see if any of you have questions too. You might be interested in how the writing happened or more about what's happening in the novel. And I also want to make sure there's time for you all to chat one-on-one with Yann and do a book signing too. So does anyone in the room have a question? If you feel brave enough, raise your hand. Yeah, we would pass out the mic if somebody does. And while you're feeling or thinking about whether you feel brave enough, I'm going to ask Yann one more question here. So Harlow goes to Oxford and is searching through and looking for something. Can you talk a little bit about the research you did as you were looking for something to uncover? Because we had the conversation about the Iliad, you read it, but it's so much more than that when you start writing a book.
Well, the Homeric world is really a world unto itself, sort of like Shakespeare. You can really lose yourself in it. So the research I did was, on the one hand, that I read the Iliad twice very carefully, and then I looked at various translations just to sort of, because I said I don't speak any ancient Greek, so just to try to assess what was actually said. So you go to various translations, and the translating of Homer has been a literary sport for centuries. You know, there's Alexander Pope who practically rewrote it, and there's so many translations you can look at, and each is in something different in small, important ways. A lot of translations stick to the iambic pentameter, which is Shakespeare's meter. I didn't see the point of that. First of all, I can't do it, so mine is in free verse because that's all I can manage. But I looked at different translations to try to assess. Like there's one key one, for example. I'll give you an example of the difference in translations. There's one scene in the Iliad where Homer describes Achilles' tent. One of the key motivators in the Iliad is the death of Patroclus, who is, we presume, although it's not in the text, we presume is Achilles' lover, and the death of him would therefore explain his anger. Although frankly, if your best friend dies, that might be also an excuse to be very, very angry. But there's an assumption that he's gay, that the two are lovers. And yet, in this description of the tent or the hut, depending on the word used, sometimes the hut, sometimes the tent, it seems in all the translations, the way Homer describes it, he says, Achilles' bed was here on one edge of the hut, and over here was Patroclus's bed. And each had a beautiful girl, a captive girl who was given to them. Now that clearly signals to me that Homer's suggesting there's nothing untoward happening here. Each man is heterosexual in his edge of the tent. Well, a translation just came out by Emily Wilson that has done very well. It's very interesting. In her translation, the beds are in the middle. They're in the middle. I said, okay, that's a very different image that it conveys. So I happened to just meet her recently, and I asked her about that. And she said it all turns on a single word called, in ancient Greek, of the other side of. And most people have interpreted the other side of the tent, which is it could also be the other side of Achilles. The other side of Achilles' bed. So I looked at a lot of translations just to that, to sort of figure out what possibly was being said. And then I went to Oxford. Harlow bases his research on this extraordinary discovery called the Oxyrhynchus papyri. The Oxyrhynchus was a town in the south of Egypt, south of Cairo, that had a peculiarity. It wasn't directly on the Nile, so it was never flooded, which means its garbage dump survived for millennia. Literally nothing decomposed because there was zero moisture. And among the things the Oxyrhynchites threw out were papyrus that they'd written on both sides, so it was of no longer any use, so they threw it out. And that has been preserved. So it's 500 years, a slice of life of 500 years of this town, from roughly 250 BC to roughly 200 AD. Everything, wills, bills, letters, petitions, unknown sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas, one of the non-canonical Gospels. A lovely poem of Sappho was found in the stuffing for a mummified crocodile. An extraordinary find. And so Harlow Dunn discovers what he feels are wisps of evidence of this lost Trojan War story. One thing we should say is the son of nobody is a commoner. There is a call for egalitarianism in this lost Soad. Everyone in the Iliad who speaks, except one exception, is a blue blood, is either a god or a goddess or a king or a queen, and someone noble. One exception, Thersites, who is described by Homer as the ugliest soldier in the Greek army. He's mocked, and when he is allowed to speak, what does he do? He attacks Agamemnon. He says, why are we here? What do we have to gain? You get all the gold, you get all the treasure, you get all the girls, we get nothing. So why are we here? And he's promptly beaten by Odysseus, who comes over with a stick and beats him. Why? Because he's questioning the social order. And yet what Thersites says makes total sense to us. Indeed, why would a soldier be there for 10 years only to get Menelaus's wife back, Helen of Troy, and some bits of treasure that were stolen 10 years ago? Why would they do that? Doesn't make any sense. So it makes sense to us. So there's Harlow Dunn in these 700,000 bits of papyrus. It's a monument of archaeology, this papyrus. He discovers wisps of this story. Now, people say, is it true? So no, of course not, it's a fiction. But as I said to you earlier, the Iliad is also a fiction. These are competing myths here. We're all talking myths here. So the research, I went to Oxford. I met Professor Coloma, who is the guardian of these papyrus. That was really interesting, seeing these actual little wisps. I nearly felt like taking one, but I did not. It would be illegal, that would be theft. But I really felt, but mind you, these people discovered the papyrus, a little tiny anecdote. I did so much research. There's so many of these papyrus, once they've been properly assessed and everything copied, they're of little value intrinsically. So the Oxyrhynchus papyrus people were very clever. They said to everyone around the world, if you give us money, you'll get one of these, actual bits of this. So These they're everywhere. There's even boarding schools in the US that have them. There's some obscure little college that happened to have someone who knew someone at Oxford. They have a ton of them. So they're all over the world. There's a thin sprinkling of these Oxford papyrus around the world because it was a good way to get money for these people around them. Anyway, I did that research. And then one of the key things I did, actually, simplest things, I just went to Greece. Alice very kindly looked after our lovely children. And I went to the Peloponnese, to Mycenae, the ruins of the Mycenaeans. Lovely, very ruins that were very lovely to quite substantial ruins. And then I went to Troy, which has so been washed away by time that it's not even called Troy anymore. It's called Hisarlik. It's south of Istanbul, south of a lovely little town called Çanakkale. And Troy itself is extraordinarily disappointing. If you go there with great, it's like, oh my God, it's going to be Troy. This is amazing. It's going to be like Paris, but like sort of a bit buried. Well, no, it's not. It's this dumpy little archaeological site that honestly, everyone goes around there and says, is that it? And it really is that it. It's just mounds of red brick that's quite worn. The walls are so unimpressive. These famous walls of Troy, you'd have to be a little 3 inches tall to find them impressive. It's most people who go to that area of Greece intend to go to Gallipoli, where the Australians and the New Zealanders died in such great numbers during the First World War. They have incredibly impressive cemeteries. They don't bother going to Troy. The most impressive thing at Troy is the Turkish Tourism Authority built a very large-scale reproduction of the Trojan horse out of wood, which you can go into, which is quite fun, and that's about it. So, but I still went there because what was amazing is just closing my eyes and feeling the wind, the sun, and it seems to carry the spores of antiquity. And you can sort of imagine what might have happened at that time. So I did that kind of research, and then ultimately I just sort of closed my eyes and tried to imagine myself as a bard, trying to convince a skeptical audience about this story, and then delighting in the footnotes. I was very happy to, because I said this is a story that partly advocates for egalitarianism, anti-elitist, and so I love reading up footnotes. One of my lines that I quite like in my own book is, I say at one point, we're all footnotes to a greater story. But I think it's true. All our small little lives, which may seem small, collectively make for the lives of our nation. And so each of these little footnotes is essential because it explains, it supports the text above it. So it's to me, a lovely visual metaphor of this verse on top and these footnotes on the bottom. Well, these footnotes are essential. They explain and hold up the text above it.
Does anyone have a question at all, or would people rather jump into the signing and get more comfy and move around a bit? Oh, we have a question at the back here. Just gonna smooch by. This is Dee, yeah. Wave at Olivia. She's at the back. Olivia's waving. She's waving.
Congratulations.
Hi.
I can't see the kids. Where are they?
Wait by there.
Okay. Congratulations. We have a copy that's sitting here. We've both haven't had a chance to crack it, but you wrote it. So tell me, what's the best way to read this?
Well, that's one thing. One of my favorite words in the English language is a word called boustrophodon. Boustrophodon, which in Greek means as the oxen plows. So as an ox plows, it gets the end of a furrow and it naturally turns around and goes like this. So it sort of zigzags across the field. And when the Greeks invented writing, it wasn't at all obvious how they should write it. And so if you look at early Greek writing, it is such a fun thing to do because they were insane. They were writing any which way. And one of them was boustrophodon, which makes total intuitive sense. I don't know why we abandoned it, but boustrophodon, you write from left to right. And then when you get to the end of the line, you turn and you write from right to left, including the spelling. So words are written in opposite direction depending on the line. But there's no line break. So you just follow naturally. When you read boustrophodon, your head tends to sway. And you go down. It's a lovely way to write. So that was one method. They also wrote up and down, like some Asian alphabets, up and down. It was wild with how they wrote, and sometimes they'd combine many methods. But anyway, they took 400 years to decide how to write, actually, and they finally decided on what we now do conventionally, left to right, with these very jarring line breaks, which I find totally jarring. Then you have to write, and then you have to fly across a page. It's a sort of a wasted microsecond. I don't know why we didn't do boustrophodon, but anyway, we are children of Homer, so you read it in the conventional way, left to right, top to bottom. So you can read it any way you want. I mean, you have fragments, then where a fragment ends at the bottom of the page, the footnotes start, and then you have your footnotes end the next page, you have a fragment that starts. So D, you can read it, all the fragments if you want, all the footnotes, but then I think the logical way to read it would be read a fragment, read its footnotes, read a fragment, read a footnote. The footnotes, in a sense, what I like of it is they're in respectful dialogue. The top of the page is the past, the bottom is the present, and they are in dialogue. And I think that's the best way to read it.
Thank you.
It's a good question because I think sometimes footnotes you never quite know how to reach them. Eh? So I think it's interesting, and I think once you get into the rhythm of the book too, and kind of trust the way it goes, it becomes, certainly in reviewers' experience and the readers we've spoken to, a very fluid, connected interpretation between the poetry and then the story underneath. Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. You sort of alluded to this in your comments already, but one of my all-time favorite quotes is a quote by you, which is, "Fiction is not real, but it's true." And I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've always been interested in this mix of fact and fiction because what I find alluring about fiction is that it can touch on a sort of a holistic truth. You don't want to deny the facts because that would be to believe a lie, but greater truth goes beyond the facts. You know, there's a great degree of subjectivity to life, which is sort of thing what I discuss in Life of Pi, the profound subjectivity of life. Things are as they are how we interpret them. And what fiction does is it can access truths that aren't necessarily factual, aesthetic truths, psychological truths, things that don't quite fit as fact. And often what then happens is that you, as I said in the book at one point, you don't need the facts anymore. Which, in fact, just to make a quick allusion, because we always have to talk about the present moment, the problem with Donald Trump, who incessantly lies, and every time you have his speech where his lies are pointed out by the New York Times, let's say, and other newspapers, I can see why they do that. We don't want to tolerate lies. They have to be called out, but they slightly miss the point. Because what Donald Trump has, and that's the problem we have with him, is he has a story. He has a story. He has a vision, a misbegotten vision, but he has charisma, like a lot of great leaders, terrible leaders like Hitler, let's say. But he has charisma and he has a vision for his society that has nothing to do with the factual. So you point out one of his lies to, let's say, a Trump voter, they say, well, it doesn't matter. And they'll find another fact. You know, disprove that one. They say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he has story and he has gone beyond the facts. I think he's a unique US president to have to so little rely on facts. He has a story of grievance and resentment that speaks to a lot of Americans who've been abandoned by the system, who are not multimillionaires, who are not billionaires, whose towns have been completely shut down. He has a story for them, and they don't care about the facts. Just as if you tell a Christian, you know, there's no facts about Jesus, actually. They're not going to slap their forehead and say, oh, I no longer believe. Why? Because they have a story. So I think a great story can be something that truly guides your life. And that's a fact with any kind of great story. How many kids have read Harry Potter? And of course, it's obviously a fiction, yet things about it will affect them and stay with them for life. And you all have novels, poems that you've read that have changed your lives. Well, clearly they've changed your lives, even though they're inventions. So clearly these inventions speak to us as to who we are and how we approach life. Thanks for the question, Santosh.
Oh, we have a question at the back. Oh, we have two more. And then I think we'll make sure, just because we have some young listeners and people who are probably a little uncomfortable, so we'll take your question and then
Yes. Love the novel. My favorite part is Hades, and your irreverent take on the god, and you bring him down to a human level. And I like the idea that he's bored and he doesn't, as the god of the underworld, he doesn't know what death is. Could you comment on that? Because that was my favorite part.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hades among the Greek gods is peculiar in that in the old traditions, first of all, he had no children. He doesn't whore about the way all the other gods do. There's a sobriety to Hades, is very unusual among the Greek gods. And he's the only god it's unusual to think of gods talking to each other. You don't conceive of Krishna, you know, having coffee with Buddha or Buddha talking with, you know, Yahweh. We don't think of religions as somehow being in communion with each other. So Hades is the only god who's mentioned in the Gospels. He's mentioned several times in the Gospels, even from the mouth of Jesus, you know, who says to Peter, you know, your church will be built here and it shall not fall before the gates of Hades. So that how strange that one religion is referring to another one. And which god? The god of death, which makes sense for Christianity. So there's a sobriety to Hades that I liked. And yes, in the character, so as Medea meets Hades, and they have a quite lengthy dialogue. But I thought he was the interesting in part because I said none of the other gods, Zeus is not mentioned, Aphrodite, you'd think possibly or Athena might be mentioned in the Gospels, but no, it's only Hades. He's the only one who survived to get as referred to in Christianity. So the other thing too, it makes sense because the Gospels, the earliest Christian documents were Paul's letters, and they're written in Greek. He was a Greek-speaking Jew, and all the Gospels were written in Greek. So, and Greek would have been tattooed with Homer. So here you have, obviously the Iliad was written in Greek. These two foundational documents written in the same language. It all comes down to language in a way that was really interesting. But anyway, Hades, yeah, I thought was a very sober god, and I thought he's the one that I should feature. Because after all, he's the god that every Greek would meet. Some would not necessarily meet Athena because they weren't bright enough. Some would not necessarily meet Aphrodite because maybe they didn't have a great love life. But every Greek soul would eventually meet Hades. He's the one that they would all meet. Well, because everyone dies. He's the god of death, right? Well, maybe there are other reasons, but certainly because you will die and therefore you would eventually be in Hades as a hotel.
Unless you're very lucky.
Yeah, I know there was one in the audience,
Yeah.
but I didn't miss.
Yann, I bought your book on Saturday and I finished it yesterday. It's very impressive. I wonder, can I look forward at some point to your take on the Odyssey?
That's a great question, but no, instead what I'll tell you about is my next book. I actually have already written my next book. While I was waiting for my Canadian editor to read Son of Nobody, there was a 6-week hiatus, and we happened to be in Mexico, Alice and I and our 4 children, and I had a 2-week fellowship, which now Alice has, but for that time I had it. So after 1 week, we had to go home. They had to go home because the kids had school. So I had a week in Mexico, and I, in a sense, nothing to do. So I said, oh, okay, well, I'll be on holiday. But instead, I thought about my mother. My mother's 85 years old and she has Alzheimer's. And we have lived that for a number of years. She lived with us for 10 months and now she's in a wonderful care home where they take very good care of her. So I've been used to thinking about my mother in practical terms as a loving son. But when I was in Mexico there, for some reason, I thought about it in artistic terms of how could I react to this as a writer, as an artist? And in 6 weeks, I wrote a whole draft for another novel. It's not a memoir. I'm not particularly interested in writing a memoir because everyone knows about Alzheimer's, so I don't want to just account for that. Instead, I wrote a book that it's in 52 chapters. This was Alice who pointed this out. Is it coincidence? No, it must be historical. That there are 52 cards in a deck of cards, and there's 52 weeks in a year. I'd never noticed that. You pointed that out to me. So I thought that's striking anyway. So it's a novel in 52 chapters, but you can read it in any order. So it'll have to be published in a box. I had a box made by a printer called Friesens. And there's 52 little booklets. Some are just a face, like just one face of a page. Some are up to 16. They're either 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16 pages long, which is how booklets work, right? If you take paper and fold it and staple it. And so you can read the chapters in any order you want. I want to create a metaphor on Alzheimer's where you lose memories and you lose connections. And so there's a lot of cross references. Each chapter is a single sentence. So in a sense, as you're reading about memory loss and chronology loss, your own memory is being tested. So for example, at one point there's a very famous French short story called La Chèvre de Monsieur Séguin, Mr. Séguin's goat. It's a very, very famous French short story. So in one booklet, I translate it into English. In another, and in 2 other booklets, I refer to it. Depending on how you read the book, you will approach even that little element in a different order, therefore you'll get something different. And so there's all these cross-references. For example, I talk about Yitzhak Shamir, who for you is probably, if you remember, Yitzhak Shamir was a prime minister of Israel some decades ago. It's not for political reasons that I mention him. Yitzhak Shamir was kind of like the Rock Hudson of Alzheimer's. Rock Hudson for me was sort of the poster child of AIDS. Decades ago, he was the first famous person to be known to have AIDS. Yitzhak Shamir was the first well-known figure who had Alzheimer's. It was the first time I read about it in terms of someone significant was Yitzhak Shamir. So there's references to Yitzhak Shamir, but once again, depending on how you read the book, all this will come to us. It's all the same story, but because it's going to be told in, I don't know how many combinations of 52. The only booklet that has to come first is the one with the copyright page. My publishers want that copyright page. So that's on the first page. But so I have this, it'll be like a deck of cards. You can shuffle it and read it any order you want. And it's sort of it's a reaction to the loss of memory and the loss of chronology. And it's called The Forgiven and the Forgotten, which has its irony. So it's an ironic title.
I love it when you speak French. I just even when you're saying something silly about goats. I was like, oh, that sounds so good. And then I was like, oh, there's still a goat in there. We went to the Alzheimer unit to see Yann's mum. It's a very good unit. And we were there this weekend. And she was very pleased to see Yann because he's been on tour. He's away on tour a lot over the next couple of months, going to lots of different countries, which is why it's so nice to be here with all of you. And so she was delighted to see him. She still remembers him, although she remembers very little. And he got to tell her he was on tour for his new book. And then Yann went to like go put the book away in her room, and he came back out and she said, oh, Yann. And I said, oh, he's been on tour. She said, really? He said, for his new book. So she's had a lot of pleasure from the fact you're doing so well with it. We'll take one more question, and then I think it's really important that we get some time to talk with all of you and visit and have some fun and move around if we've been sitting on the floor. Hi.
Hi, Alice.
My CrossFit
Yann,
buddy. Yeah.
from back here. Thank you very much. So here's my question. When you start reading the book has really this the hook, opening with kind of adventure. It's kind of like Indiana Jones or Da Vinci Code. But obviously the book is way more than that. There's other other things in the book. My question is about the topic of the character relationship with his daughter. How did you come up with this? And I really enjoyed that part quite a bit. So it's basically interwoven. It comes back in and out, and he's basically talking to his daughter throughout the book. So I just wanted to find out where this comes from and what that means.
Yeah, without wanting to reveal too much, yes, the character has a daughter who stays at home, and he yearns for her, and he thinks that, I said I wanted a parallel with the Greeks, so just as SOAS leaves Greece for Troy, thinking it'll be a quick war and it'll be profitable. Same way Harlow leaves his wife and his daughter Helen for Oxford, thinking he'll bring back riches, just as the Greeks did, and it doesn't work out for SOAS, and it doesn't work out for Harlow. And Harlow ends up, because he misses his daughter, he ends up sort of editing and bringing out the fragments and dedicating them to her. So he's particularly delighted when he finds one about animals. In this epic, there's a multiplicity of references to animals that would have been known to the ancient Greeks, but in a marginal way. So one thing that I liked, there's a repeated reference and a lovely illustration of a chameleon. And I chose the chameleon because the chameleon strikes me as a perfect example of how we should be. This is my private symbolism. You don't need to get it, but I'll know now because I'm going to tell you. But what I like about the chameleon is that, of course, as you know, the chameleon is a very adaptable in terms of its color. It can blend in the background. And yet if you think of it, a chameleon, while melding into the background, always remains itself. It is still itself while adaptable. So that's very important to us. And the other cool thing about chameleons, if you think about their eyes, they have divergent eyes. Unlike us who have stereoscopic vision, we can sort of pretend, we can cross our eyes briefly, but of necessity, our eyes look in the same direction with a slight distance between them, which gives us stereoscopic vision. Chameleons, we don't need that. They have eyes that can look in completely divergent directions, which has me thinking that there's a superiority to us, because I cannot look at two different realities and understand it at the same time. What does the chameleon's small little brain think when it's looking at two radically different directions, at radically different realities? I thought that was very interesting. There's a little animal that is ahead of us somehow in its comprehension of the world. So there's lots of, and so all this he sort of dedicates to his daughter, but I wanted that to be sort of the emotional core, is his relationship with his daughter. He misses her. One of the questions I asked in the book is the worth of work. Just as the Greeks asked themselves, why are we here? Is this worth it? Harlow asked the same thing, and in a sense, honestly, I do too. Alice just mentioned I've been on tour, and she's been looking after our 4 kids, whom I desperately miss when I'm away. I try to talk to them on my cell phone, and I get like 3 seconds before they toss the cell phone away because they're busy and they're having fun, and it's sort of like a dagger in my heart that my kids are too busy. So I miss my kids. So I ask myself, is this worth, even a small way, is it worth my while traveling the world promoting this book when at home there's my lovely children and my lovely partner whom I miss? So these are questions that I said the ancient Greeks asked, Harlow Dunn asked, and I myself ask. Listen, thank you very much for coming in such great numbers. Thank you very much to Jasper and Benjamin for hosting me here, and for McMalley Robinson. Thank you very much all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to Alice for hosting me so lovely and lovely viewing.